So our next step. Now we talked about backgrounds in the last demo. We're gonna leave backgrounds for a minute, but I just want to say really quickly, if you have a background that you want to be a photograph, okay, and you want it to fill the entire backspace, I'll do a demo on that if I feel like we have time, but we're really running up against the edge limits here, so I'm gonna have to back off a little bit. I'm gonna show you how we do the title area today, as well as, and then the menu bars are on Wednesday, and then that's basically it. I mean, that'll basically be that'll be the end of it. But before we get there, what we want to talk about today is how to control our divs a little bit more when we start doing what we call divs inline, or like basically line them up in a row horizontally. Because essentially what we're going to do is we're going to put this logo here, and I'm going to add like a little tagline to it. So sometimes a website will have like a tagline. If you go to my website, Weisbrod Imaging for Real, now this isn't my real design on my website. Actually, I really hate the W, it's just too thin. But anyway, in fact, let's make it a little bit bigger. But if you were to go to my website, one of the things you see is I just have a real simple description of what I do, and it says education. What does it say? Education, photography, and design. Okay, and that's a good indicator of what I do. Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about doing a tagline. Even though I don't have it here in my design, we're going to talk about doing a tagline. So anyway, we've got this whole thing going on here, and we need to kind of separate things out and put them side by side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save out the two images that I need. Now the first image is going to be the logo here, and that's pretty simple. The second one is going to be the text, the remainder of the text. And the reason why this has to be an image, now it doesn't always. You can actually type in web pages, and that's better sometimes to do that. And we'll get more to that with our menus, okay, with our buttons and stuff. However, some fonts, especially really fancy ones like this, if you want this font, you can't choose it in the website or like with your code, because not everybody has this font. A lot of people wouldn't. I don't even remember what font it is, but a lot of people wouldn't, and so what would happen is it wouldn't look the way you want it to. So we're going to use this as a graphic. Now the second thing that we're going to have a problem with is when we're saving these images, I've already put my background in. Now if it's just a solid color, you can just save them as JPEGs. But because this is a gradient, a lot of times if you do this, you won't be able to reposition things. It's best to save these so that they have a transparent background, is essentially what I'm saying. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create two new files from my website design file right now, just to kind of help me out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my crop tool, and I'm just going to crop out my I'm going to crop out the W logo here, and just double click, get rid of it, okay? And then we can just turn off our backgrounds here and everything else, and I'm just going to go File, Save As. I'm just going to call this logo.psd. And the reason why I'm doing this, does not need to be on caps. The reason why I'm doing this is so that I don't end up really screwing up my original design. Okay, so I'm going to hit Save, and there we go. And then I'll go back. Let's go back. I can reopen my website design here with Photoshop. And then I'm going to do the exact opposite here, and I'm going to crop out just this title area here, okay, and save that as a separate Photoshop file as well. So we'll call this title ending.psd. Yeah, I will. I'm just going to turn it off. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep them both open. So just turn them off. There we go. And actually, sometimes it's easier to keep it on for a little bit so you can see what you're doing, you know, because it's kind of hard to see the text. But we don't need anything else. I mean, yeah, all that stuff is totally incidental. In fact, I could probably cut a little closer here. And you do want to kind of crop it as close as you can. You can add space later on. Just don't chop off any of your letters, right? And you can see how the gradient now is totally messed up, obviously, because of me resizing it and everything else. Okay, so we can just turn that off too. So now we just got our color. So here we got our logo, and we've got our titles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the background off on both of them, and I'm just going to go Save As. I'm going to get out of here and go back into my images folder, and I'm going to save them as what we call PNGs. PNG stands for Portable Network Graphic, I do believe. And that is, am I right? Portable, was that? Yeah, that's a good point. No, Portable Network Graphic, and basically the important thing about PNGs, there's two big things about them. Well, three. Number one, they're universal, so PCs and Macs can open them, which means that they're web safe. Two, they're not compressed. So PNGs are really only good for small images, not really big ones. Big images with PNGs would take forever to download. Even on broadband, if it's big enough, it can take a while. So they're not compressed. But that also means they're very high quality. And three, PNGs support transparency. And that's the key one that we want to use. So if you can notice, I've turned off all my backgrounds. So when I save this, it's going to keep that transparent background. Now before I do this, actually, I want to turn on my background. Again, I want to crop in as tight as I can go here with my W logo, just like that. Okay, so that I have a good, nice and tight. That way I can, so let me just save it as the Photoshop document, and now I'll save it as the PNG. And that way I can adjust my spacing in the web very easily. So then I'll just save it as a PNG file. There we go, logo PNG, save it. And we'll do the same thing with our title ending. And the important thing here is to make sure that any layers that you do not need are turned off. Okay, it's going to help us out a lot. Get out of the design files, back into the image, title ending, and we're just going to call it PNG. Okay, there we go, save. Now, nice and simple. So let's just minimize those and let's go back to our code. So now what I want to do is I need to put them inside my header div. And this is where things can get a little complicated. And the reason for this, things get complicated here because what you're going to have is you're going to have divs inside divs. And what ends up happening when you start having divs inside divs is you don't know when one div ends and the next one begins, or if they're inside each other, when does the container div end, that sort of thing. And the key to that is something I've already taught you, and that is these little notations. So that once I start placing new divs inside the header, it can get really confusing. But if I've used my notations correctly like this, I won't get too confused. So let's add a div for our logo, okay? So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to go bracket div ID equals, and I'm going to call this logo. Nice and simple. And then I'm going to end the div with another bracket slash, and then I'm going to go bracket exclamation point dash dash end of logo div. Okay, I'm having problems typing today. And I end that, and then you can see that everything's back to its normal colors. Now, one of the things you might want to do is you might want to hit return here or whatever. Just make sure that the div for the logo is in between the beginning of the header and the ending of the header. That's what's really important. Now, let's give this thing some size. So right now, if I go up to my header code here in the CSS, I can see that my header is, oh, actually what it was, I had it something else. Let's see. It was 125 with 10 pixels of padding. Now, I changed that earlier this morning, and you'll see why in a second. So padding, yes, padding. Actually, I don't know if I had any padding whatsoever, so let's just take that off, and I'll show you that in a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back down. Oh, I didn't delete it. Uh-oh. So we're going to go down. I like to keep my CSS in the same order as the divs, at least as much as possible. So I'm going to go up here and put the logo in right after the header. Since the logo's inside the header, I can't put the code for CSS inside the header code, but I can put it right below. Pound logo. Again, make sure it is spelled exactly the same way. And then what we'll do is, let's just say width right now, let's just say 200 pixels. I don't think that is the width of it. In fact, I know it's not. And our height will be 125 pixels, just like the header above. We're just going to leave it right there for now. So save. And if I go over here, now you can see I've got a new box right here. Okay, that works out rather nicely. And so what we can do is now I want to grab that image file and I'm going to drop it right in. So I'm going to click on my files here. Actually, let's make these bigger. And there's my logo PNG. Now here's what's really cool is just drag it right in the code and make sure you put it in between the two. Okay, make sure you're not doing this. Don't put it here. You got to put it right in between the where it starts the logo div and then where it ends the logo div. So right there, boom. When I drop it in there, it's going to ask me, do I need alternative text? You don't need to, but I'm going to say logo. Okay. And then all of a sudden, you'll notice it puts the code in for you, image source equals logo.png, and then it's going to tell you the width, which is rather nice, width 133, height 122. Okay, that looks good. Now, one of the things that I like to do, especially if I'm doing something like this, is I always make sure that my div and my image are the same size. And that way I can move them around with the margins pretty easily. So I'm going to go back into my CSS here, and my width is going to become 133, and my height is going to become 122. And when I do that, you can see how, you see there's a little gap here, okay? And there's and then the logo goes right up to the edge of the W, just like that. And it's going to look pretty good. Let's preview it in Safari. And there we go. Nice and simple. So now what I need to do is I need to get the next one right next to it. So if I, the next div, which is going to be the ending, which is the iceroad, okay, without the W. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go down here into the code, and it needs to be after the logo div, but it still needs to stay inside the header. So one of the things, when I start doing this, I'm going to hit a couple returns and give myself some space before the end of this header div. And that way I have some room in here to type, and I don't have to worry about it. You'll also notice that if your lines are wrapping around, you'll notice it skips a spot here. So the numbers can really help you too, the line numbers. So then I'll just go div ID equals, and we'll call this the title, okay, and the bracket. And then we'll end the div again, just like we did before. Make sure I do my notation, end of title div. Okay. Now all I need to do is I just need to go in here, and I'm just going to add my title div. So we're going to go pound title. Okay. I'm going to do my width, and I'll do my height. Now, the height is going to be, for now, let's just say the same as everything else, so 125 pixels, semicolon. And my width, let's just say for right now, we'll go, let's see, it's 960 wide, right? Well, my logo's 133, round up to 140, so that means I've got 820 left. So let's just do an 800 pixel width for now. You know, I mean, just rounding. Just the important thing is to round down, don't go over. But we'll adjust that again in a minute. So there we go. So there I've got my title width, I've got that. Now all I need to do is add my title ending, drag the image right in there. Okay, and something bad happens. Yes, it's not next to it. So here is fundamental principle number 1 of web design. When you have divs and you don't tell it to do something other than, well, if you just don't tell it to, divs will always align themselves in vertical order, one on top of the next. There's a very simple command that you have to do in order to let the div know that you want them next to each other in a row across. And it's a little weird because, well, it just does it a little strangely. So let's go back to Dreamweaver. What I have to do is the two divs that I want next to each other, okay, are the logo and the title. So all I have to do is right here, I'm going to type float left and float left. When you set the float to left, what will end up happening, save, now all of a sudden they're going to go in line. See that? Voila, nice and simple. If you don't add that float, then all of a sudden the div is basically busting out of wherever. So now, let's just say a couple of things. First off, let's just say, I don't like what's happening here. I don't like how close this is to the top, for instance. Okay? I want to move it down. Well, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. And actually, you know what? We'll deal with those in a separate. Let's deal with those in a separate demo. Let's just stay with float and let's just stay with the float. So now what I want to do is I want to add a tagline, okay? And the tagline, what I want it to do is I want it to say education, photography, and design. Now I could come up with something a lot jazzier than that, but that's what's on my website right now, and that's basically it. But every brand will have something like a tagline like that. So let's go back to Dreamweaver, and we're going to add another div here. Okay, so we're just going to go back down here, and we're going to type div ID equals tagline, and the div, and then we're going to type education, photography, design. Okay, and there we go. So now I've got that there. Oh, and I got to make sure I put my notations in. End of tagline div. There we go. So I know what's what. And notice that I have just stayed well inside this main guy right here, where it says end of header. That's really important that everything is inside that header div, because if you don't do that, it's really going to screw things up. So now I've got this div ID tagline here. And let's just say that I don't want that. Let's see, so pound tagline width. Let's say I want it underneath the ice road there. So I'm going to put my width at 800 pixels, just like the other one, which is way too big, but that's okay. And my height at, well, we're going to have to adjust this a little bit, aren't we? Let's just say 30 for right now. Now here's my problem. If I want it underneath, and I need 30 pixels, that means I can only give my title 95 pixels. So I'm going to look, how tall is my, oh, it's 85, perfect. So one of the things I didn't do is I didn't set up my height and my width for the title here. So let's just do this, title, and 429, so let's just go 430 for that. And now this is going to get all messed up again. Why isn't this down here? Because I had the float. Now, this is interesting. So if I set the float for this, then this stays in line as well. But I don't want this here. I want it down here. So one of the things that you've got to do is sometimes you have to think about how the computer is working, and you have to do things in kind of an odd way. So here's what I really need to do. I need to take the float off of the div with the ice road imaging, okay, the title here. But if I do that, then it might not float correctly with everything else. So I have to contain these two guys, in another div. That's going to be float left, and then these two will have no float so that they will align themselves vertically. So watch what I do. Pretty simple, actually. I'm going to go back in here. Here's my div title. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in another div ID equals title area, okay? And then, now watch this. This is key here. I'm not going to end the div here. I'm going to end the div down here so that it's going to include these two. So then I'll do my little notation, end of title area div, okay? Notice no spaces, nothing like that. I did add a capitalize there, okay? Because I think I explained that to you in one of my other demos. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our float left off of the title. And then here we're going to add another div called title area width. And what we're going to do is we're just going to make this the whole width of the rest of the box. So if my header is 960 and my width of my logo is 133, okay, like I said, we'll round up to 140, then that gives me 820, right? So 820 pixels, that'll be good enough. My height, I want the exact same, 125 pixels as the header. Okay, and here I put my float left. Okay, close it out. The colors are telling me. And now what's going to happen, because I have the float left here and here, these two are going to align side by side. But then these two, the title and the tagline, because I took the floats away, those are going to align themselves vertically inside the title area. Does that make sense? And then if you take a look at it this way, let's go to this, you can see now how this has aligned itself like so. Let's color code these, and maybe this will make it look a little bit better. So just so that we can see. So my tagline's 800. That's just silly. Let's make it 4. Okay. So let's give them each a different color just so you can kind of see what's going on. So we're going to go background color. Whoops, I'm outside of the thing. That's bad. So in my title area, we'll go background color. And let me just choose let's just choose like a red. Let's just go white, actually, for this one. And then here for the title area, background color, let's do a red. And then for the tagline, we'll go background color, and we'll choose a yellow. Oops, semicolons all around. Ah, there we go. So now you can see how this second half is all white, but then you can see the two divs that are now lined up vertically over top of each other. Does that make sense to everybody? And what will end up happening is I can do a couple of things. Now the first thing that I don't like, and this is where you can start to play around with these things a lot. Let's minimize these so we have more space. First thing I don't like is I don't like this is too far up. I want it down some more. And then I want my text to be a little bit bigger. So I can take my tagline text here, and let's get rid of our, well, let's keep the colors just so you can see what I'm doing here. And so what I'm going to do is there's a whole series of, you can do a color for the font. So let's do white for that because it's going to stand out on that blue background nicely. And then I can do font family. And let's just choose, I don't know, let's up at the Homer Geneva. And then I can also do font size. And then I can say font size, and then let's say 16 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. So save. I got a little bit bigger. Let's turn off that background because that's hideous now. Even better, because my title area is white. That was genius. There we go. So now you can say, I can sit here and make it bigger. So let's go 20 pixels. There, that's nice and big. And now what I can do is I can take my tagline, since I know I've got a 20 pixel font, let's just make the height 21 pixels out of that. And what that allows me to do is now I can bump this whole thing down, okay, by using the margins on the title. So I can just go margin top. It's another new thing here. And I've got a lot of room now that I made those smaller. So let's try 15 pixels. That looks a lot better. There we go. It's almost perfect. So let's get rid of that background color. And now let's preview it, and you can see exactly what it's going to look like. Okay? And so now I might not like the way this is working. I might want to bump this up a little bit or whatever. I also would probably want to bump this over to the right, and I hate the font. So there's a lot of things that I can play with to get this to look good in positioning and everything like that. So let's take the margin to 10 pixels here on the title, and then let's add a left margin to the tagline. And let's set it over 50 pixels and see if that looks good. And you know what? Let's put a top margin on this. Let's separate them a little bit by about 5 pixels as well. You can kind of see how things start to move around, and you can really start playing with the way they look. Now the other thing that looks really awkward is it's really pushed real far down to the bottom of the header. But that's okay. That's only going to look awkward because this has a black border here. Once we get rid of that black border, nobody will know that it's that far close to the bottom of the header. So I'm not going to worry too much about how it looks up against that border line because that doesn't matter. That's going to be gone anyway. What matters is how close it will be to the menu bar or whatever might be underneath here. So that's a major consideration. But for right now, we don't really need to worry too much about that. And you can definitely start to play with things like this. The main things that I want you to get out of this, though, okay, are your ability to order things left to right using the float, okay, float left. That's one thing. Number two is the idea that sometimes in order to get a more complicated design, so like I've got over here, where I've got two divs on top and bottom, but I have those organized in a way that they're to the right of this, what I had to do is I had to do one div to the left, then one big div to the right, then two smaller divs inside that so that they could be top to bottom. And that's really important. You can think about it in terms of like, what's your biggest chunk first? Set your biggest chunks first, left, right, and then inside you can go top, middle, bottom, or whatever you need to do. But you want to think about that because it's, again, it's not like Photoshop. You just can't drag it and drop it. You just can't say, ooh, I want it over here, and drag it a little bit with the move tool. Unfortunately enough, HTML is still much more like a Word document than it is anything else. In order to move items, you have to space them out in a grid. And that's essentially what it is we're working within a vertical and horizontal grid here. And that's the only way that the website or the HTML and the CSS really understand how to move the images around. So you've got to step back and think about it in that way. Because if you try and think about it the way you have all year long with Photoshop, where you just can literally click, drag, and drop, you're not going to be able to get things exactly where you want them to be. Does that make sense to everybody? And then using the margins. Those margins are really cool, by the way. You can push things over and up and down with margins. It's really sweet. There's a lot of stuff you can do with those. Okay? So the other really important thing is to make sure that when you're doing the code, okay, you've got these little notations, okay, so that you know when each div ends and begins. Because look here, this is really important. First off, the header starts here, and then the header ends here, and then the title area ends here, and then the title area ends there. And inside that title area are two more divs, here and here. Okay, so you want to be really careful, because once you start getting divs inside divs inside divs, it can get really confusing where one ends or the other one begins. And these little notations are really important to keeping track of where each div ends. Because if you don't do that, it'll just be all slash divs. It can be like 4 slash divs in a row, and you won't know where one ends and where one begins. And you might say, well, does it matter? Sometimes it won't matter. Sometimes you got to put it in the same place regardless of where the div ends. Sometimes it really does matter. You know, if you were to accidentally start the title area here by accident inside this div here, if you were to put that there, this whole thing would explode. Because now you're putting it inside the div with the logo. And then the whole website would literally everything would start coming out of the boxes, and you'd have major issues. So, you know, where you put the divs is actually really important, and that's why these notations are really, really important, to let yourself know where the divs end. Okay, I mean, that's huge. Any more questions? All right, that's that.